some things up physically. Move my mic over here so you can hear me well. Hello, good afternoon. Welcome back for another lecture. Maybe not a whole hour. We'll see. I've got a few things to show you, but not too many, and hopefully not too many. But I want to talk about video games some more, and specifically ways we can start understanding kind of what's out there in the big world of video games, all the things that we have. So that's what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to give people a chance to get online. It looks like somewhat fewer than this morning, which maybe people aren't available again. But I'll just kind of blabble a little bit, and then we're going to do a kind of a brainstorming activity together here, and then that'll be what we do. Then I'll get into some slides, my slideshow. I will go ahead and share this so that I can, so you can follow along if you'd like, or if you'd like to look at different parts of it. Anyone with the link can view. Yes, that's what we want. Okay. And put this in live stream. Here's my new slideshow. There you go. I'm just posting it in Discord there. If you want to follow along, of course, I'll put this all on Canvas later. I just need to kind of, after class, after I'm done streaming, I'll kind of organize things and put it together in Canvas. Just a quick reminder about the schedule. Tomorrow we start again at 10 a.m. like normal, but it'll probably be 10 to 12 as opposed to like 10 to 11, then a break, and then something else. But it'll probably just be a solid block of 2 hours. So plan for that accordingly, and that might be it. I mean, if we do a third hour tomorrow, it might be, it won't be a lecture, whatever it is. So anyway, hopefully that's working out for you all okay. Hopefully you had a good time with some brainstorming. I saw some good discussions in your various, your team channels. I tried to get in on a Scribble game, but I couldn't, by the time I clicked on the links, you all were done, I guess. So we'll try that again too later. I think playing things together is kind of fun. In fact, I was kind of thinking, if y'all are watching, do any of you play Among Us? Because that's a pretty fun game. From what I understand, I've only played it a couple times just to get to see what the deal was, and it seems pretty fun. So I thought we might try to play that together if you want. It's free, or you can play it for free on the Android, or you can get it for like $3 on PC if you want. So I thought maybe we could try that Friday. I don't know. You've probably, if you've played it at all, you've probably played it more than me. But if you've never played it, then that's okay too. But it seems kind of fun, so maybe we could try that. All right, so today I have a bit of a activity. Yeah, it is 10 max. Yeah, so that's why. I mean, there's 10 people on right now watching the stream. So those of us here right now could all play on a single game. I think if I made it optional, I don't think everyone would do it. So I think maybe that would work, or maybe we could play two games. I don't know. We could figure something out. Anyhow, let's take a look at something here before getting to the slides. I would like to try this. I've never used this particular product before, but it is called Jamboard. It's a Google Jamboard. This is a collaborative whiteboard situation. So I'm going to send you this link, and once you click the link, you'll be able to add to this whiteboard as well. And let me show you what you can do with it. You can use a pen to draw. And then I'm just going to do Control-Z to undo that. These are the undo, redo buttons. And you have an eraser if you want to erase something. You can add Post-it notes, that kind of thing. It's pretty intuitive. I feel like there are other tools like this, by the way, and there was one that I was thinking of that was super simple, and I cannot find it. I can't remember what it was. It was the kind of thing I saw once, and I thought, this is great. I'm definitely going to use this. I should make a note of this, and I made a note of it. But I don't remember where I put the note. So this is kind of like today's version of the problem I was having yesterday with that adapter that I couldn't find. But anyway, this works, and it works fine. So here's what I'd like to do. I've got a little sticky note explaining this. I'm going to send you the link, and I would like for you to add to this Jamboard every video game genre you can think of. And so this is kind of an off the top of the head kind of thing. So you don't need to go look at a list on Moby Games or something. Just off the top of your head. And I've got a couple examples here. First person shooter, battle royale. I guess I should spell that correctly, but I don't know if I can edit it after I've typed it, actually. Maybe not. I'll just add it that way. So write in black ink first actually on here to type and add as many video game genres as you can think of. Thank you. Somebody just brought me some tea. So yeah, because I need some tea for my throat. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. I'm gonna send you the link. If you are confused, just ask, but I think this is pretty straightforward. So let me show you the link, and again, as many as you can think of. And this isn't like a test to see who knows the most. It's actually, when you add it, you're not leaving your name here. The point is just to end up with a lot. So go ahead and add as many as you can think of, right? Just go to it. I think this works in real time, so I think I should see you all on here like a Google Doc, but you're all contributing to it, hopefully. So again, I haven't used Jamboard before, but it seems to be working so far. So let's see how it goes. And I will let you all do that while I sip my tea. And I'm gonna watch what you add here. And actually, I'm gonna add a few more too, while you're doing that too. I'm gonna keep adding. Point is to end up with a lot, so I wonder if we're probably gonna run out of room here, aren't we? At least. Yeah, and try to not duplicate it if you see one. I don't see any duplicates yet, but as you can see, there's certainly some similar ones: first-person shooter versus first-person survival, right? I mean, those are obviously pretty similar, and that's okay. Like, we want to get similar things. Morpega, yep. Yeah, music-based, and you could also add, rhythm games. Whoa, what was that? That's cool. Somebody's drawing something too. Let's see. I wonder if we can make this bigger. I mean, I can zoom out. Yeah, I feel like I want to make the text smaller so we can add more, But that's okay. Let's keep going. And somebody's using Post-it notes then to make yours kind of stand out better. Yeah, that's all right. Let's do, let me add a couple more rhythm. I don't think anyone's added this yet. Oh, you can change the size of those. That's good. That's good to know. Oh, I bet you can actually change the size of this after you've... Yeah, okay, so after you've written your words, you can change the size. Nice. And you can also turn it. And you can edit anyone else's too, I think. So, yeah, that's part of the fun here. This is pretty fun, actually. I like seeing you all add these things. So let's keep going. I think we can come up with some more. I think these are all good, but I think there's still more we could do, right? Okay. So I assume you mean roguelite as a alternative to roguelike. I mean, those are two. There's a distinction. All right, right. Oh, okay. So last thing I just saw was making. You're saying you're doing. You can only. Sorry. Okay, so if it's so that's fine. So now we know who's reading the Post-it notes, Lottie. But that's good that at least works. Yeah. So make sure Colin, make sure you're adding these two here if you haven't already, because these are some. I think you've got a couple that are not on here yet. On the Jamboard. I mean, I can add them too, I guess. Let me. Nope. Sports. Yeah. Okay, so let's see if there's a couple more. I think the main thing that I saw Colin adding that isn't already on here are things that are something like, so Doom like. or sometimes they were called like Doom-alike. I remember the people using that term. Back before we used the term first-person shooter basically to mean that now. Oh, you can't add the... Oh, you're on your phone? Is that what you're saying? I see what you're saying. Okay. So, Al, you're just saying you are on your phone and you can't use use it on there. Okay, great. So it's the same situation with Lati, I suppose. But yeah, you've got roguelike, Doom-like, looter shooter. Oh, I don't think we had a looter shooter. It was on a list I made earlier, but not on this one, I think. And yeah, okay, yeah, do what you can. This is still good. Yeah, turn-based shooter. That's an interesting one. I don't think we have that one. All right. Okay, so I think this is probably pretty good. I think we could keep going, maybe, but this is pretty good. I think if we wanted to, I think this gives us a good array of things to start working with. Okay, so let's try something else now. And I just thought of this, so this might be a little messy, but no, it's not. You know what? I'm not going to even try it. I was going to say maybe we could sort of group these together based on the kind of thing that they're describing. So, in other words, like you have shooter games and you have different kinds of shooting. So there's first-person shooter. Let me just do that a little bit. So it'll get chaotic if we all try. But let me just do a little bit of disarranging. So let's do like we did. Let me just move some. Let's kind of make a shooting corner. So we've got the first-person shooter. We've got bullet hell really is also another kind of shooter, but usually top-down shooter. You've got what else is kind of shooting oriented? Well, shoot 'em up, sure. Yeah. Yeah, we could do sort of. Yeah, so survival horror can be shooting. Yeah, it is third-person shooter. That's the main one I was looking for. Rhythm, definitely not. Yeah, survival horror. Turn-based shooter. Survival horror can involve shooting, but doesn't usually. But then I think there's kind of like, if we're making this kind of continuum, we could have sort of survival horror and first-person survival kind of over here together, right? Like they're sort of both moving in the same direction away from first-person shooter, right? So these are working. Okay, that's fine. Thanks. You've added a lot, Colin. Thank you. And then like you could look at other ones, like farming is sort of like a simulation because you have to like simulate things. I assume you mean like literal driving a tractor kind of farming, because those are those games, and those definitely are sim. Like horror is interesting because horror could be done in different contexts. This could be a first-person shooter horror game, or a survival horror game, or a roguelike horror game, or a Metroidvania kind of horror game, right? So these are all. The point I'm trying to make in sort of illustrating the difficulty of sorting these genres into groups is that many of these things that we're describing about video games are not mutually exclusive terms, and they overlap with each other in a way that makes it pretty hard to parse out and really get a grip on in terms of what it is we're saying about games when we say this one is a first-person shooter, this one is a survival horror. Certainly a survival horror game could involve shooting in the first-person perspective. So it's really interesting. This is a system that these genre terms that we thought of off the top of our head, these are terms that exist in the world that we've seen, that we use to tell each other about the games we're playing and that we're interested in. So they have utility, but they don't really have intellectual rigor, and that does make it a little tricky to work with when we try to do formal things with video games like we're doing in this class. There's slightly more nuanced ways of expressing that problem, but I think you see the problem here when you look at it. That when we call something a first-person shooter, we're identifying different features about that than we are when we talk about a rhythm, right? So there could be a rhythm game that involves first-person shooting, but the term first-person shooter has come to mean something more than what the name literally denotes. Like, it's not just shooting in the first person; it's a particular kind of shooting, and usually in a military context. And so if I sort of said first-person shooter and asked you to think of something, perhaps, I'm sure it has you might think of like Call of Duty kind of things, or Doom-like kind of things. So these are definitely terms of art, but terms that have come to mean other things and connote other things beyond their denotative meaning. It is also an interesting way to look through video game history, because if we pose a question like, okay, what is a first-person shooter? We could say then, what was the first first-person shooter? And someone added the term Doom-like, and for a while, at least in my recollection, people just use the term Doom-like to refer to those games where you shoot things from a first-person perspective. So if somebody mentioned Doom the other day, Doom is a game where basically you try to kill a bunch of demons. And so any other kind of game that you play where you try to kill as many things as possible from a first-person perspective could be said to be a Doom-like. But gradually we've used the more clinical-sounding term first-person shooter to talk about that. And I think it's more fair too, because Doom is its own thing, and it makes sense to think of it as a kind of thing and look at other things like it, as opposed to thinking of it as sort of the progenitor of everything that came afterward. Oh yeah, sure, JRPG. I don't know if that's on here yet. This is so Colin's chatting on Twitch, adding some things here. Yeah, and then of course we look at all the fusions, or the games where you occupy different modes in the game, right? So I've been playing just as my kind of killing time, goofing off kind of game. I've been playing a lot of Borderlands 2 recently, and you drive a vehicle sometimes in that. So is that a driving game? I mean, sort of. There's sort of like driving mini games built into this game that is otherwise a first-person shooter, or maybe a looter shooter is the term I've seen for that, because it combines, it takes some elements from RPGs and some elements from FPS, and then we've got a game. So yeah, somebody is messing with my post-it note there, my instructions post-it note. That's fine. Yeah, I was gonna also ask you all. This one's getting really crowded already, and so maybe let's just try it. Why not? So now let's switch to a different color of text, and I'm gonna use blue. Oh, you made a page 2. Thank you. I want to use page 1. I mean, page 2 is because, as you'll see, we need to continue with these terms where they are. I would like to try to come up with at least one example of each genre, because I don't want to take for granted that all of you know all of these genres, and it might be useful to see and think through some of these. So just take blue text, and then near a term for a genre, just write a game that you can think of that's an example of that. And you can make it whatever size it needs to be to fit, or rotate it if you need to make it fit better. This does not have to be neat and tidy. This is just sort of like literally what we would be doing if we were in person, is I would give you all dry erase markers and tell you to write on the board, and we would have fun doing that, or use post-it notes on the board or something like that. Yeah, this is good. Just make sure you make it another color than the black text, so we can tell that it's an example. Oh yeah, good point. So Colin's thinking of even more. We do have survival on here, first-person survival, stealth. But Colin on Twitch has mentioned like Candy Crush. Yeah, and I think sometimes people will use the term casual game for that. So I think, although it's also kind of just an action puzzle, I guess. But I'll just say casual, because that is also a genre. Whether or not you could consider Candy Crush a casual game, maybe there's a better term for it. Yeah, for Doom-like, I think Doom is probably the right example for that one. So I'll go ahead and add that. I'm trying to get Colin's things in here since he can't type. Doom. Gotta write Doom in all caps. T. Yeah. Yeah, Untitled Goose Game. I haven't played that. I think I own it. It's one of those it's been on my Steam wish list for a long time because it seemed like a funny idea and I wanted to try it out, but I don't think I've ever actually played it. All right, so this is really good actually. Yeah, I think we got a lot going in here. Actually, I'll just add a couple more while I'm thinking of it. I probably Super Mario Brothers might be the prototypical platformer, but I really like Joust. I think it's a lot of fun. Cool. Yeah. So one thing that we might do next, like let's say we're trying to we're trying to come up with our grand unified theory of video game genre. A thing we might do next is, now that we have these genres, now that we have examples of them, we might look at all of the examples of a particular genre, determine what all of those examples have in common, and then generate from that a definition of that genre. And so we might say, for the, let's see, I'm trying to look at some of these that maybe have multiple examples. Oh yeah. Duck VR, nice. The Borderlands. I'm trying to find. I'm trying to find. Oh yeah. So you've got. Okay, interesting. So this will actually be a really hard example, but under indie games, you've got Untitled Goose Game and Celeste. So those are two pretty different games, but those both have the quality of being indie. So what is it that they have in common? Like, how would you make that? How would you make a definition of indie games that clearly identified both of those to someone who did not know what an indie game is? And I pose that as a rhetorical question because off the top of my head, I don't know. So Untitled Goose Game, you're running around, you play a goose, it's goofy. Celeste, it's a platformer. So like it's how do you, the gameplay mechanics seems very different. So others, though, like first-person shooters, we didn't really get any examples here, but I kind of assume you know what that is. The first-person shooters, we have a first-person perspective, we have shooting. And so any game that has that could share that, could be part of that genre. And certainly if we look at all of the examples of games that someone would supply, if we asked them to come up with a list of first-person shooters, they would probably almost certainly share that characteristic. Now, a further question then would be, is that a meaningful characteristic? Like, is there a reason that it's useful to put these games together, other than describing the thing that you do when you play them? And I think that's questionable with several of these categories. But yeah, so in Discord, a couple of you were suggesting, we could identify indie games simply as games not made by a AAA studio. And that makes sense. And that's practical and that's good. But then, as you see with any definition, you can always find the edges of it, right? Like, where is the, how many people is in your development team is too many before it stops being indie? I think that, that's sort of a misleading question, right? But you can see that's a question raised by the criterion that you set when you say it has to be a small team. So how small is small? How big is small, right? I think another way to look at it might be like, what are the goals of the game? Not the goals that you have as the player, but what is the reason that this game exists? And oftentimes for games like Undertale, like somebody just added, Untitled Goose Game, Celeste, there's an interesting story being told, and a kind of story that breaks some kind of conventions or does something new. There's a kind of experimentalism there. As we noted in the earlier discussion the other day, a lot of indie games tend to be sad, or they tell sad stories, and so that's a thing that they have in common that can be really interesting, right? And let's see, Kelly, what is your? I can't see all that. So Kelly, you posed this as a question, but I think it is good to make connections between games, absolutely. So I said, when I was saying earlier about FPS, maybe it doesn't matter that much to call them FPSs. I mean that most people are interested in, that doesn't tell us much about it. So if I present to you a game and all I tell you about it is that it's a first-person shooter, you're not going to know necessarily if you want to play that based on that. And also, it's almost like... It to me is almost like saying that this is a book that has pages in it. Like, it's telling us how we use it, and it's good to know that. I like the kind of books that have pages in them, but it doesn't tell me what the book is about. So that's really the kind of difference that we're talking about. Now, in video games, we have more kinds of things than we have kinds of books, so that analogy falls apart a little bit. But the point is just that there's a different kind of thing that we're talking about. Yeah. And Colin's talking about the indie question there, and I think, so on Twitch, Colin's talking a bit about the some of the differences between indie and mainstream or AAA kind of games. So, Yeah, I think that's some good points there too. So, so the point of this brainstorming was to start getting some terminology out there, getting some of the games out there, but also to show you how genre can be very useful. Like it can be a very useful thing to talk about when we want to compare games or recommend games, when we want to consider what games to purchase. We kind of know what we like, and we kind of use that to look for more things like the things we already know we like, or avoid the things we know we don't really like. And that's the way that genre works in all kinds of contexts, not just video games. What's interesting about video game genres is that they tell us things about the game that we don't usually ask about other media. And that's why I think it partly is interesting and partly, complicated. Right. Like, so we wouldn't call movies like third-person watchers. Like, that's a movie that you watch, right? We wouldn't describe the physical phenomenological thing that you do to consume the medium for any other medium besides video games, right? At least I can't think of any. But that said, we can learn a lot from some ideas about film genre. And so I want to talk actually a little bit about film genre and also other genres. And now it's time for me to segue into my slideshow. I'll leave this up. You're welcome to keep adding to it or playing with it, whatever you want to do. And I think, it's all saved in here or something. So I'll link to it in Canvas too, if you're accessing this asynchronously. But let's take a look at this. And did I already share this? I don't think I did. There's a lot of chatting on the slides here. Oh, I did. I did share it back here a bit in Discord. So you're welcome to jump on and take a look if you'd like. But let me publish this full screen and kind of go through some points here. Yes. Yes. Okay. All right. Game/genre. So I actually want to start with the literature because if we're thinking about categorizing creative artifacts, we actually, the first place people start thinking about that is actually in the context of literature. We could go all the way back to Aristotle, who talked about different forms in drama, and it's a thing that we find pretty logical as soon as we start getting text. As soon as we start thinking about text in a cultural sense of like a thing that we all read and share, we want to know what that does and what kinds of things there are, and we want to start talking about them in terms of that. So there's a philosophical context, an aesthetic context that Aristotle gives us way back, thousands of years ago. Exactly. It's in the textbook. But the other place I think we encounter genre really frequently and intuitively really is in the bookstore. So I hope you go to bookstores. They're fun. If you go to the bookstore, there's categories. There are shelves, and they're labeled by the kind of thing that you're looking for. So if you're looking for fiction, there's a fiction area, there's a nonfiction area, there's a biography area, there's a self-help area. And those signs that we see on the top of the aisles, those are, or at least function like genres in the sense that they direct us to purchasing the things that we're interested in purchasing. We know the kinds of things we want. So that's just a physical context. Of course, we see those kinds of categories in all other sorts of contexts. I listen to a lot of audiobooks, so I filter by the genres I'm interested in, and that helps me find books that I didn't know I would be interested in. So I discover things by looking within the genre that I already know about. This is a thing we do, pretty common sense. So if you want to look for manga, it's in one place. It's all there. And if you know you like one title, you go there and you look at it, and then there's something else interesting next to it on the shelf, and then you buy that other thing, and then you kind of go from there. So genres have a real practical purpose. It's an economic purpose, like it directs consumers to the products that producers want to produce, and it helps producers and consumers be on the same page. So a producer can make a thing and know that there's an audience for that kind of thing, and then a sale happens and culture moves forward, and we've made progress. And someone made some money, but someone also gets to read a book or whatever it is we're talking about, right? So again, books have genres, and that comes from the long history of thinking about genre that way. Okay, so let's see. We also can think about this in the context of film and TV. And of course we do as we work on these things. I was just noticing my chat just kind of cut out on Twitch, so I'm hoping it's still streaming. And it says I have 2 viewers. I'm down to 2, which is usually, it was like 14 a second ago, so I don't know what happened there. Maybe it's just a glitch on the dashboard thing. Doesn't matter. I'm going to keep going anyway. film and TV, another context where we consume things based on genres that we already know and like, and we want to try to figure out more things of that sort of thing that we like. And film and TV have developed their own rich genres and categories that we discuss and understand. Now, there is, within film theory, there are different ways to think about genre, and an influential way of organizing those ways of thinking, this is getting pretty meta here, has to do with the difference between semantic genres and syntactic genres. So in other words, these are two different ways someone might try to describe what a group of films has in common, and they would do that by focusing on different kinds of things. And the semantic side focuses on understanding the presence or absence of traits, like does it have this kind of thing in it or not? If it has this thing, it's part of this genre. If it does not, it's not part of this genre. Whereas a syntactic approach will focus on how things are organized and structured in the film, not so much on the content. And I'll show you I have some more explanation of this. So let me kind of go into it. I know it's very abstract to begin with. So this is a quote from Rick Altman. His book Film Genre lays this all out, and then he explains that he ends up proposing a hybrid way of thinking about it. So the semantic approach stresses a genre's building blocks, whereas the syntactic approach privileges the structures into which those are arranged. So Star Wars provides a pretty convenient way of explaining this in terms of these two different approaches to describing a genre. Now, you may disagree about what Star Wars is if you look at, and also different text within Star Wars. Someone might say it's a fantasy, someone might say science fiction, someone else might say Western. Certainly we could say there are elements of all of those, but what we'll find if we kind of keep going with those conversations is that sometimes we actually mean different things when we say those words. We might mean different things by the Western, for example. And so there are two basic ways to think about the Western. Is it a movie that has cowboys and horses in it? Then it's a Western. Or is it a kind of movie where the lonely outsider comes into town and solves problems by shooting people? If it's the latter, it doesn't matter if he comes in on a horse or on a hover bike. It's a Western if it's creating that situation where he solves problems that way, and he or she, right? So The Mandalorian is a great example in terms of helping us think through these different ways of thinking about genre. So I imagine you've heard of The Mandalorian. I don't know if you've seen it. I hope you've seen it. I think it's very good. I know some people who didn't care for it, and that's fine. I think it's and certainly some episodes I enjoyed much more than others. But the last couple episodes of season 2 I thought were very well done, and I hope you got to see them. Yeah, exactly. So let me use this as an example, and I'm not going to spoil anything if you haven't seen it yet, or if you don't care to see it, that's fine too. But I do want to talk about a particular moment in a particular episode and a single shot of it. I think I can make my point without really spoiling too much, and also without requiring you to know a lot about the storyline. So let's just kind of pose this question as a rhetorical question first, and then look at it practically. So if we're looking at this in a semantic sense, so this is, remember, the building blocks. Like, what are the building blocks that it has that we might be able to use to determine what genre it is? So what are those building blocks in The Mandalorian? So we have spaceships, right? We have handguns, not revolvers, I guess, but blasters, but they look like revolvers, right? We have swords. We have martial arts. These are traits. Is that my last one? Yeah. These are traits that exist in certain genres, and if we're taking a semantic approach, we might say, the presence of spaceships means that we're talking about science fiction. So, or we might say that the presence of martial arts means we're talking about kung fu, or the presence of handguns means we're talking about a Western. Or we might put it on a scale and say, well, 30% of it is spaceships, but 80% is handguns. So therefore, it weighs more into the Western pile, and we should call it a Western, right? I mean, these are the kind of games you end up having to play with definitions if you do it that way. Or we could look at it in a syntactical method. We could think of it in terms of like, okay, it has an outsider who rides into town. The Mandalorian character is frequently on the edges of society, but also in several episodes, he enters a place that he doesn't belong and has to figure his way out, find his way through that town. Often is rejected by people there, but nevertheless ends up saving them. And that trope is what you see many times in Western films, especially the Clint Eastwood era of Westerns, usually solving problems with violence. There's a moral code that supersedes a legal code, and that's something you also see frequently. He's also literally a knight in shining armor. I mean, he's got shining armor, so maybe that's a fantasy trope. But he also plays that role, like he plays the role of the savior for Baby Yoda. So let's think about this in terms of some of those possible references. So what I have here, this is a shot from episode, was it 13? I think it was episode 13. And I know it's really dark. It's probably hard to see, but I lightened it up a bit. And I just clipped this out earlier today. So resolution is not great, but hopefully you can see what's going on here. This is Ahsoka. This is a village, and she is entering the shot from the right and standing at the end of a long kind of street as dust or smoke blows from left to right behind her, and she faces down a series of enemies, I guess. The magistrate and some soldiers, and she's getting ready to enter into combat with them. So this moment really, it was a great episode, absolutely, I agree. But this shot in particular really cemented a part of the syntax of this episode that I hadn't noticed before. This exact shot, and I'll show you other examples of this shot that you might know. If I can, there we go. Okay, so here's a GIF, blurry. I apologize, but you can hopefully see the point of the imagery of what we're seeing here. This is Clint Eastwood. This is from A Fistful of Dollars from 1964. This is him standing at the end of a street, and I didn't show you the establishing shot, but he's at the end. He's just blown up something. So that's what the smoke is from, and he's standing at the end of the street, facing down the gang, the leaders of the gang that he's about to fight with. And so it's this kind of shocking moment where the dust clears and there's Clint Eastwood at the end of the street. This shot to me is part of what the shot with Ahsoka Tano is referencing. Like, it's definitely quoting Fistful of Dollars. You may also recognize and if you haven't seen Fistful of Dollars, perhaps you've seen Back to the Future 3, where they essentially recreate this entire scene when Marty has to engage in a duel with Griff. Is it Griff? No. What was the name of was it Griff? Griff is the future, the grandson. Anyway, we just watched this with the Back to the Future movies as a family. They're great. But anyway, he with the poncho and he has like the poncho on, and he's got a big chunk of iron in his chest area. So when he appears to be shot, he actually is not, and he's fine. That whole moment was taken from the end of. Is it just Biff? No, it's Mad Dog. Is it? I think I want to say it's Buford. I'm talking about the 1885 character, so not Biff from 1960, who's from 1965. But anyway, the point is, Biff's, because anyway, I'm getting sidetracked. The point is, they were definitely quoting it, and it was quoted in a way that you would recognize because Marty tells people that his name is Clint Eastwood, and so it's a very, it's good. It is Buford. Okay, yeah. But he goes by Mad Dog, and that makes him mad. I really gotta say, I enjoyed those movies so much. Just rewatching them with my kids. I mean, they held up very well as movies, I should say. My kids loved it too, so it was great. Anyway, so this is definitely a quote, but this is the original in that sense. However, Sergio Leone, who directed this movie, was quoting something else that came before it, and it's actually even closer to the Ahsoka Tano shot. This is from Yojimbo by Akira Kurosawa, and this is the main character Yojimbo, he comes around the corner. We see the dust clearing, and he's getting ready to engage in combat with the gang. There's a lot more of other parallels in the same scene. There's, for example, in all three of these scenes, the person in question has an ally who is suspended, like hung from something nearby, and also like even just visually, the arrangement of this shot looks very, very similar to Ahsoka. So I think the shot from Mandalorian quotes Yojimbo even more closely than it quotes Fistful of Dollars, but Fistful of Dollars was already quoting Yojimbo in that same shot, and actually, I know there was legal action. Fistful of Dollars is basically a remake of this movie, and so it's I don't remember the outcome of the legal action. Actually, I just blanked on the title of this movie. But Kurosawa is the director. Somebody can look it up and tell me on the chat if you can think of it. It doesn't matter too much, except to point out that we can see this as a semantic structure within this. So syntactically, this is about this outsider who comes to this village and solves problems ultimately by killing all of the bad guys. Spoiler alert. So that's a pattern or a trope, and that is also so it's a plot-based pattern or trope. But we see the signal for that similarity across these three titles as a visual trope, like the visual trope of the gunfighter or swords fighter in this case, and Mandalorian's case, appearing at the end of an alley with smoke blowing behind them. It's a shot that you will see, and now that I've pointed it out to you, you will probably see in other places. It's a thing that references that kind of situation, and situation is what we're talking about when we talk about when we're interested in syntactic genres, right? So yeah, just to go back here and kind of look back this one more time. So semantically or syntactically, we could discuss the Mandalorian's genre category in any or all of these ways, I think, productively. And it may not matter ultimately what we decide it is, but I think it's helpful to use some nuance when we talk about the things that we think are important about it, like the important features about it, in terms of what it has in common with other works. So if we understand this comparison, by the way, I mean, with Fistful of Dollars, I mean, I don't want to get too far ahead of if you haven't seen Mandalorian, but there's a lot of there are some questions about like what is Ahsoka's character doing at this point in the Star Wars history, and she references Thrawn, Grand Admiral Thrawn, in her combat with the Magistrate. So she's going to have her own TV series next year or the year after, I guess. I don't know, but to think of her as a character kind of like Clint Eastwood's character in Fistful of Dollars is pretty interesting, because that character in Fistful of Dollars is I would say he has a moral code, but he's definitely more of an outsider, more of an anti-hero than the Mandalorian. So, on that spectrum, it's a bit dark as a character. And so where Ahsoka ends up is going to be interesting to see, because that quote here creates that possibility. Thrawn is the best. I think I'm really excited to see that. I read the Thrawn trilogy, I guess not. I think there is a Thrawn trilogy, but I read the Heir to the Empire book trilogy many years ago, and I loved it. So, pretty excited to see kind of Thrawn, Grand Admiral Thrawn, possibly in some of the Star Wars universe stuff as it expands out over the next year. Okay, so let's take a look at some of the ideas from the textbook to help see how those authors deal with these things. Because ultimately, so I went on that little tangent there about semantic syntactic definitions, because ultimately I think that's the kind of thing that the authors of the textbook are trying to do. So Simon Eggenfield-Nielsen and his co-authors are trying to create an idea of video game genre that is very much like Rick Altman's semantic/syntactic approach. Like for him, for Altman, he wants to take those two sides of that slide and mush them together. And I think these authors are trying to do something similar, but mush together in a way that extracts the essential elements and focuses on the thing that makes the most different in terms of meaning. So let's take a look at some ideas. For them, they are interested in thinking about goals and then how one achieves them. And that slide, I don't actually have anything else on this slide, but what I'm trying to get at with this is that by the left and right juxtaposition, I kind of ran out of time making this slide. But in thinking about what you're trying to accomplish in a video game, I think that is close to what we talked about as semantic traits earlier, like the list of things. So goals and I mean goals in the most literal sense, like getting points, killing the bad guy. If those things exist, you could call it a certain kind of thing. That could be a semantic marker for creating a typology of games. Also, if you think about how you would achieve those, I think that has more in common with the syntactic structure of genres in the sense that again, if we're thinking in a very literal sense of how do we achieve that, like shooting. So your goal might be to kill the bad guys. Your method of achieving them might be shooting them. And in that case, we're talking about a semantic/syntactic genre for video games. Let me see. This might make a little bit more sense with some examples. So let me go with it here. Sorry, I just took a little. I'm not sure. It looks like you posed a question on Twitch, but I'm not sure I understand your question. But I think you're in Discord now. So if you want to rephrase your question or follow up, that would be okay. Maybe you can do that. But let me talk about some of these genres. These are the ones that the authors of the textbook give us, and then I've kind of distilled what I think are their main ideas for these. Okay, thanks. That I think help explain it, and also I'll provide an example. So for action, you're using motor skill and hand-eye coordination. So that's the syntax of your experience. If we think of the experience of playing a game, the play of it as something that you participate in, the text of it, right? So in this case, this is a screenshot from Space Invaders, and you have to execute actions, coordinate actions skillfully using movement. So motor skill, looking at something, knowing what to shoot, where to move, you have to execute that successfully in order to achieve the goal of the game. So this is an action game because that's what we're doing. So this is a broader kind of genre. And if we went back to, I don't know if I still have it up here. Yeah, if we go back here, we could probably put lots of these under the action genre in that sense. So first person shooter, definitely. Battle Royale, it depends. Battle Royale doesn't necessarily define a modality, but probably first person. Platformer, definitely. Action. Metroidvania, definitely. So we could definitely put a lot of these under their much bigger action category, and I think that's fine. Where was I? Here, yeah. But then you run into the question of well, we still want to talk about some differences, so we can still use some of those terms in addition to putting them under the same action umbrella. Okay, so for adventure, this is interesting. So adventure, they don't give you a straightforward set of verbs for this one, but they note that deep thinking, patience, decision-making, and interpretation. And I kind of added that there because a lot of times with adventure, you have to figure out what's going on. You have to wait for things to develop. In many cases, adventure games are very much story-oriented. So you're trying to understand a story, and oftentimes understanding a story gives you the information that you need in order to make the right decisions, to unlock the right chest or choose the right set of power-ups or whatever it is. So an adventure game could be a role-playing kind of context where you have decisions to make like that. But ultimately what we have here usually is some kind of quest structure. But I mean, that's getting into content. But what we're thinking about in terms of the semantic syntactic approach here is the thinking, is the patience, is the decision-making, and the interpretation. It's a much more intellectual kind of action that you take in order to participate in the game and to complete the syntax of the game experience as we see it. Okay, so strategy, situational decision making, and sometimes it's very quick. By the way, screenshots. This is Zelda, Legend of Zelda from NES. This is StarCraft. So situational decision making, meaning you make the right decision in the moment. Sometimes turn-based strategy might be slower, but real-time strategy, often speed is important. So there is some motor skill, hand-eye coordination, but using that to make a decision that's based on a bigger strategy, it's not just sort of click the thing when it lights up sort of strategy. It lets you, it means that that's how you're engaged with it. It's at a intellectual level, but at a puzzle level that you're playing out in either real-time or turn-based. And you do often see, what are you saying? Colin was noting. You do often see that. I think the adventure or the quest structure is pretty common. But that's I want to be clear though that's that identifies something else about the game than it being an adventure game. So an adventure game might not have a quest structure, might not be a journey, might not be exploration based, although it often is. It's just that what we do with it is thinking, being patient, making good decisions, and understanding a story. That's what makes it an adventure game under this rubric. Now, maybe 95% of the games that we could think of would have those structures that you're talking about, but what you're talking about is content, I would say more so than structure, but it doesn't matter that much. Okay, so and then finally process, and again I kind of added this a little bit, but I think because they pointed out in their textbook, they were saying that process games tend not to have goals, um, and so it's a little hard to think about what you have to do in order to be successful at those goals. But my experience is like as you play these games, you come up with your own goals. Like I want to see what happens if, and then you set up your SimCity to do whatever thing you want to see. Like I want to see what happens if I take away all the fire departments, and then see what happens. So you've made your own goal of chaos, I guess, or just your understanding the system, and you've configured it in a way that'll help you accomplish that. So it's about the configuration of a system usually, and then interpreting what that configuration accomplished in the context of that simulation. So these are getting a little bit abstract, but that's kind of the idea here, that we're configuring a simulation. Yeah, and then just to kind of wrap things up, like not wrap up, but getting close to wrapping up, the we still have all of these terms, and these were just as I was putting slides together. I just this was my off the top of the head list for a couple minutes, and many of these, I think all of these should be on there by now on our Jamboard. These terms still do have value and meaning, even if we can say that these have more intellectual rigor and are helping us be more nuanced in terms of the things that we want to notice about video games. We can still use these, and they take on a practical meaning that goes beyond a narrow description. And I think that's part of the issue here, is that if you look to these to be nuanced and have intellectual rigor and illuminate formal properties, they're not doing that. They are terms that are basically idiomatic, like they just sort of, somebody came up with it and someone else thought that was a good idea, so they started using it. And so they just sort of came out of that. And as such, they aren't necessarily going to tell us the kinds of things we might want to know at a philosophical or aesthetic level, but they're still useful. And just kind of one, I guess, final thought, and this is just one example that we could go into many, many different other examples, but I wanted to pose this question of like, what does this actually mean? So I've referred a couple of times to the first-person shooter game. It's a fairly ubiquitous genre, so I imagine you're familiar with it, even if you don't like it or if you don't play it very often or even play specific games. And I kind of said earlier that the first-person shooter, like calling a game a first-person shooter, doesn't really tell us much about it, which leaves open this idea that like perspective, like what does perspective actually mean? How we look at something may matter, actually. It may actually make a difference, and it certainly makes a difference in film. And so I wanted to almost pose this as a question here to think about, since I know I don't want to go much longer. But I want to give you an example of first-person cinema and see if you can understand or think about, why this doesn't necessarily work as well in first-person cinema. And actually, Colin, you're actually making almost exactly the point I wanted to make. But let's take a look at this here first, and then you can see about it. So this is a trailer for a film. Let me turn it down a little bit. Actually, let me just pause and explain a little bit more. This is a trailer for a film. It's called Lady in the Lake. It's actually a really fun movie to watch. I like it a lot, but it's also funny because it's fun to watch because of how awkward it is in some cases. But the premise here, this is a film noir kind of film. So you have like a private detective and like a femme fatale, and you have a problem to solve, and there's violence. But it is very much a work in that film genre, the film noir. But the gimmick is that you are part of the action, or like that's what the narrator here is going to tell us, is that you, the audience, are involved because most of the film, almost all of it, is in a first-person point of view, and you are occupying the first-person point of view of the main character. Ironically and interestingly, the main character is played, when we do see him, by the film's director, and we also hear his voice speaking for that character. So it's very much the work of this one actor and director's vision. But let's take a look at the trailer, and you'll see what I mean. Sorry, the camera acts. Mysteriously starring Robert Montgomery.
My name is Marlowe. situation, private detective. You know, somebody says, follow that guy. So I follow him. Somebody says, find that female. So I find her. But some cases like this one kind of creep up on you on their hands and knees.
Actually, I'll just mute it for a second. What you're seeing here, he's explaining how the film is going to work, and this is actually, yeah, it doesn't matter. You don't need to hear him. He is explaining the film, and so that scene of him explaining the film actually begins the film. That's how it starts. But most of the film is like this, like you see here. These are shots from the film where we are walking up to a door, seeing our shadow. The shot actually pans down to his hand on the knob, opening it. Yeah, and this is when I love it. He walks into a party late and everyone turns and looks at him. He's there to deliver bad news. Here he's accusing this guy of something, I don't remember. But this is another really good shot in the movie where we're seeing him on camera because he's looking in a mirror, and they had to do some pretty tricky blocking to make that work. Yeah, so it's an unusual thing, and it ends up being really kind of awkward for most of the movie. At one point, he is actually holding a gun and pointing at someone very briefly, and so some people have argued, I guess sort of facetiously, that this is the first-person shooter because you see him in that perspective just momentarily in this movie. But, as a couple of people already pointed out in there, first person can be very different in film. So like the shaky cam or the first person horror movies in the early 2000s, late 90s, or you can think of probably other examples where like a character is hit in the head and then we see the world go blurry as though we are from their point of view, or the classic horror movie, just the classic horror movie trope of the subjective shot where we feel like we're looking over someone's shoulder or like we're about to creep up on somebody, and it puts us in the point of view of the person. Of course, and Beck has mentioned Hardcore Henry, which is another like a first-person film, but one of very few, and I think it can make you very nauseous, and so that's why when filmmakers do it to indicate someone in a dangerous situation, or indicate someone's been hit in their head, or somebody's the effect, the drug are taking effect, or something like that, as an audience that makes us uncomfortable. Directors use that discomfort, or they create that in their films to create that sense of discomfort for their audiences strategically sometimes. Like that's part of the genre, or that's part of what they're trying to get across. And yet in video games, we don't take that. We don't tend to get disoriented by it, or at least I don't. Some people do, but I find that just anecdotally, I don't enjoy watching other people play first-person shooters. Because I find them kind of like you were saying with Hardcore Henry or Lady in the Lake. Like I want to look over there, but the camera is looking here, and so I feel frustrated by that, and or even disoriented by it, and I have a hard time with it. So I don't enjoy that. I don't really like watching Twitch streamers because of that. I have a hard time following what they're doing sometimes, just visually, because I want to kind of orient myself in that space by controlling that space, controlling what I'm looking at in that space, but I can't. If I can do it, I can do it myself. I do enjoy playing first-person games, so it's something that is interesting there. But notice something else here. The thing that I wanted to get at in terms of meaning here is that in film, often first-person point of view in film means or makes audiences aware of their lack of control. Like it takes that feeling away from you. Otherwise, we don't really notice or pay attention to whether we have control or not in a film. But when we are in a first person or even a subjective camera situation in film, we feel that lack of control. We feel helpless, and it can contribute to us not liking the movie, or maybe that's done on purpose in a horror context. But it has actually the opposite effect in video games, I think. Video games, first person point of view that we can control, gives us a feeling of confidence in that space and gives us a sense of presence in that space that we don't always have in other kinds of perspectives. It's not necessarily more immersive in the aesthetic sense, but it could be, and it's something that brings us into it. Okay, yeah, it is. And I mean that's kind of what I'm getting at. Cool. So I think if you want, the trailer is good. I think trailers often are a pretty good window into it, and you can kind of get the sense of the movie here, but really just. It actually is a really good movie to watch. I recommend it. I don't think there's a way to stream it for free that I know of. but I have a DVD you can borrow if you want to sometime. I will just, spoiler alert, the film is called Lady in the Lake, but you never actually see the lake. And there is supposedly a lady in it, but you never see her either. So it's a bit of a disappointment in that sense. But you can see why it didn't quite take off. There was a police procedural type TV show in the 1960s that tried something similar, also didn't really work. It's something that is rare, and when it's usually used to create an off-putting effect. So yeah, it's something that has a particular meaning in the context of film. And so then my question basically is, what does it mean in video games? If it means something, or it tends to accomplish a very specific kind of meaning in film, what does it do that in video games as well? Does it do something opposite? All right, cool. So I'm going to wrap this up. It's been going about an hour. I didn't really plan on or want to go in a whole hour, but I did. So there are a few tangents in there, kind of a wide-ranging conversation. But I think hopefully that was helpful and interesting. If you have questions about your commercial, I'll stay online for a few minutes. If you want to chat on, in Discord about your project or anything else, I'll be there for a little while. And then I'll add all the notes and videos and PowerPoints from today into that Canvas page. And then tomorrow, remember, 10 a.m. Don't forget, take a look at that article about Death Race, The Agony and the Exidy by Carly Kosarek. Take a look at that. It's an academic article, but I think it's really interesting. I think the story that she has to tell us about that video game is very interesting. So check it out before 10 tomorrow, and I'll be online streaming, but I'll have a couple of guests with me. So, all right. Well, have a good afternoon. I will see you all tomorrow. All right. Bye.